Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth episode of Picture Perfect. I am your host, Bobby Gross, and I'm riding solo today, guys. No co-host today. Mike Batista is out on assignment, also known as on vacation. He'll be back next week. And I did my damnedest to find a co-host for this episode today. Must have asked at least 10 people, but you know what? They're all out. They're all doing things because it is summertime, vacations, activities to do outside in the sun. They're enjoying that. I'm enjoying the air conditioning inside, which is fine with me. But yeah, we're just going to be going over a few things today, a few news stories, and then I'll be reviewing the new movie Hobbs Shaw. But before we do that, I want to plug all of our stuff. First off, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify at Picture Perfect. We are on Twitter at PicPerfectCast. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube at Picture Perfect. And if you guys could be so kind as to rate this podcast 5 stars on Apple, that would be great. That really helps us out. Gets some ears on the podcast, if you will. So we would really appreciate that. And of course, you can follow me at Bobby Is Gross on Twitter. And let's just get into things, guys. So the first news piece I have today that just broke this week was Nightmare Alley, which is Guillermo del Toro's next film following his Oscar-winning Shape of Water movie. I love The Shape of Water. That was definitely one of my favorite movies of that year. I believe that was a couple years ago, so 2017. So this is his follow-up, finally. And boy, we have a star-studded cast for this movie. I don't think anything's confirmed yet, but when these kinds of rumors come out, it's pretty much set in stone. So for this movie, originally, Leonardo DiCaprio was going to be in the lead. However, he had to drop out, and in comes Bradley Cooper, which is, I guess this would be his follow-up to A Star Is Born as well. So you have two returns to movies in Bradley Cooper and Guillermo del Toro. But you also have a phenomenal cast besides that. Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara are being considered for supporting roles, but then you also have Toni Collette, which is coming off. She's coming off Hereditary, which was one of my favorite movies of last year for sure. You also have Richard Jenkins, who was in The Shape of Water as well. You have Ron Perlman and Guillermo del Toro possibly reuniting since Hellboy, and also Willem Dafoe in this movie, as well as Michael Shannon, who was also in The Shape of Water, who's one of my favorite actors. So, I mean, this thing, if anything, is going to be one hell of a cast. And just from what we gather from the synopsis, apparently, because this is also based on a William Lindsay Gresham novel, this goes about with a roustabout Stan Carlisle, who joins a traveling carnival and unsuccessfully schemes to figure out the mind-reading act of Mademoiselle Zena and her alcoholic husband Pete. But when Pete dies, Zena is forced to take on Stan as a partner, and he quickly proves more gifted than his predecessor. Ambitious to a fault, it's not long before Stan goes out on his own to mixed results. So this could get real trippy. We know how Guillermo del Toro likes to dabble in horror. There might be some horror elements in here. And I'm just glad that del Toro's coming back to films. You know, he's been producing some stuff, but he hasn't directed one since The Shape of Water, which, again, I love that movie. I know a lot of people have its problems with it, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. So I'm really anticipating that, this movie right here. But besides, Shape of Water, I really loved Pan's Labyrinth, which I just saw for the first time this year. But other than that, I mean, his Hellboy's movies, that one movie that he made a few years ago, Crimson Peak, I believe the name of it was. I wasn't really a fan, so Del Toro's kind of hit and miss with me, but he's coming off a big hit with his Best Picture, The Shape of Water. We'll see what happens with this movie. Hopefully all these castings come through. And because if you get all of those people involved in this movie, I can guarantee you it's going to be a Oscar frontrunner. You're going to see, already some predictions that Bradley Cooper, Cate Blanchett, will be getting some nominations just because Del Toro's kind of like a prestige director now, that he has the best director under his belt. He's got the best picture under his belt. So we'll see what happens there. But also it came out this past week that Baby Driver 2, the script to Baby Driver 2 has been completed. Ansel Elgort gave an interview this past week. He's filming West Side Story, which is the remake that's going to be directed by Steven Spielberg, which that's a whole nother thing. But Baby Driver 2, the script is done. Ansel has read it. He really likes it. And this could go into production anytime, really. You know what? I'm all for this. Baby Driver is one of my favorite movies of the past few years. It was just so much fun, so much energy. I mean, that opening kind of musical number is one of my favorite opening scenes in a movie and maybe ever. It's just so good. The choreography and Edgar Wright. I mean, come on, everybody likes Edgar Wright. You know, the Cornetto trilogy, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. He's done so many good movies. It's going to be interesting, though, because the way that Baby Driver ends, I don't know that it lends itself to a sequel. But, you know, anytime I can get an Edgar Wright movie, I'll take it. I don't want to spoil anything with Baby Driver, but I just don't know where you go from here. It would be interesting. I don't know if everybody comes back. Well, a lot of people actually won't come back from the first movie, and one in particular definitely won't be coming back, Kevin Spacey. But yeah, I'm all for Baby Driver 2. You know, as long as it has that kind of it has that kind of idea that isn't just like, because Baby Driver, the first one, it did well at the box office. It came out in the summer. It did really well. So I hope this isn't just like, oh, let's make this into a franchise. I hope that Edgar Wright has a fresh idea, a fresh take for this movie. Because then if he's just doing it for like, or the studio's pressuring him to come back and make this sequel, you know, it's not going to have that same kind of impact probably as the first one did. But, you know, I trust Edgar Wright, and I think this would be a really fun movie. We'll see what happens. You know, like I said, Ansel Elgort is tied up with West Side Story for a while, but I think you could definitely see this happen, maybe in the next couple of years, hopefully. And then lastly, we got a trailer for The Irishman, which is the new Martin Scorsese picture coming out on Netflix later this year. This is his first movie since Silence, which was a couple of years ago, I believe, his first feature. He might have done some documentaries since then, but you know, this is probably one of the most anticipated movies of this year for most people. I've definitely been looking forward to it. I remember we got a little, like, barely, if you can even consider it a teaser, at the Super Bowl, which you didn't see any footage from. It was mostly just lettering, and it wasn't much at all. It definitely was the definition of what a teaser usually or should be. But we got our first trailer. This has Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. It has Joe Pesci coming back, which Joe Pesci rarely works this I don't know, this past decade. I think I read that this is going to be his third movie in the past, like, 12 years, which is insane. I believe Harvey Keitel is involved in the movie as well. And my thoughts on the trailer was, you know, I'm gonna watch this movie, obviously. I mean, this thing has been in development for so long. It's got so much anticipation behind it. And this is gonna be, like, really, I think on paper, the first Oscar contender that Netflix has ever had, made actually by Netflix. You know, you had Roma last year, but Netflix actually bought Roma on the film festival circuit, so they didn't actually make this movie, that movie. They strictly made this movie. They made it, they produced it, everything. And this thing apparently has a lot of money behind it. It's got, I believe, at least a $200 million budget. And that's because of the de-aging effects that apparently only Robert De Niro has been used for it in this movie. I was under the impression that everybody was going to be de-aged, but it didn't look that way from the trailer. And I gotta say, I just wasn't that impressed. Now, that can just be the way that the trailer was cut. It didn't exactly jump out. It's like another crime movie from Scorsese. And to put all my cards on the table, Martin Scorsese isn't one of my favorite directors. I definitely respect him. I think, like we went over last week with Quentin Tarantino, I believe he deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore. It's just that his movies don't connect with me as much as most other people who watch his movies, how they connect with them. So, it's just... I think it's just the way the trailer was cut. I'm sure this is going to be a great movie, but what concerns me is the de-aging on Robert De Niro in one of those last few shots when it's a real close-up on his face. It just did not look great. And listen, I think it comes out in November, so they have another 3 months to kind of clean it up. But I think that's the problem. It's a little too clean. His skin looks a little too smooth for me. It doesn't have any grit to it. It's just a little bit of the uncanny valley kind of thing. I'm concerned. I am concerned, even though there is 3 months to clean it up. Usually, if these companies put those kind of shots in the trailer, they're pretty close to completion. So not to say that they won't, maybe give him a little bit more wrinkles, maybe just not smooth out his skin so much. But I'm definitely, I have my hesitations about it. But when it wasn't in the close-up, it didn't look that bad. It's just that maybe that one shot really turned me off to the de-aging. But as far as the plot goes, you have Jimmy. It's kind of like a Jimmy Hoffa story. I believe Pacino's playing Jimmy Hoffa, and he recruits this Irishman to do some of his dirty business, I guess. I'm not really familiar with the story. I believe it's based on a true story. But it's just... Listen, I'm still looking forward to this movie. I'm still going to watch the movie. The trailer just didn't blow me away like a lot of people were. I should rephrase. As a lot of people found it to be, they just freaked out over this trailer. I was like, it's good. It's fine. We'll see about the actual movie, but I'm a little hesitant. There's a lot of money involved in this movie. Hopefully it was put in the right places. And that this trailer, that one shot was just, it's not going to be the whole movie. It was just that one shot, and that's it. We move on, because we've seen some really good de-aging technology over the past few years, specifically in the MCU. We've seen it involved in Ant-Man. We saw it, Iron Man was de-aged. We've seen Guardians Volume 2. You saw Kurt Russell de-aged. So I think Disney is closer to really getting it right. And of course, Samuel L. Jackson in Captain Marvel, which looked incredible. But on the other hand, Clark Gregg in that movie, that was bad. That was bad de-aging. So the technology, I don't think, is fully there. But hopefully Netflix figures it out, because I don't think it's ready. I don't think it's ready, and hopefully, like I said, they clean it up. And when the movie comes out on Netflix, we'll all freak out over it. We'll love the movie. It's going to be interesting, though, how it's going to be released, because obviously it's going to go on Netflix. But to qualify for Oscar contention, it has to play in New York and LA for, I think, at least one weekend. It might be longer than that, but theaters over the past few years with these Netflix movies have been hesitant to put it in their theaters, just because it's already available on a streaming service. So why would people pay to go to the theater and see it there? Which I would be one of those people for The Irishman, personally. I would rather go to my local AMC, watch the movie, and then watch it on my TV. It's just not the same effect, and to be honest, I love being with crowds in movies. So I would be one of those people, but I'm definitely... It's got my interest. I'm not fully out on this movie, but there's some work to be done, and the trailer just didn't blow me away. But definitely, guys, let me know what you thought of the trailer on Twitter, and because I think, honestly, I'm in the minority. People loved this trailer, so we'll see what happens. So finally, guys, we're going to go into the review for Hobbs Shaw. I saw it today, and this is actually my first Fast and Furious movie. I've just never been interested in the Fast and the Furious movies. There's just way too many of them, first of all, way too many of them. And it seems to me, it's just not my kind of movies, you know. It just never appealed to me when I was a kid. I somehow missed all these movies because, honestly, like, these would be the movies that I would grow up on, but somehow I just never saw them. And, you know, they're at number 8 right now. They just released 8 maybe 1 or 2 years ago. They're coming out with 9 next year, I believe. So that's 8 movies that I really don't have any interest in seeing. And with this one, first of all, it sold me on 2 things: The Rock and Idris Elba. The Rock is just one of those guys. I don't see all his movies, but it seemed to me that he was having good chemistry with Jason Statham in the trailers. It looked like a really fun time. Just it didn't take itself seriously kind of vibe. Whereas from what I hear, the Fast and Furious movies take themselves way too seriously. There's a lot of plot points in those films that, you know, are just really dark, and they just treat them with such a straight face that it just doesn't work with the action that they have in those movies. You know, they have the over the top action, but then all the plot is super serious. So you got to pick one side, for me at least. And with this movie, I can safely say that I thought it was fine. It was fine. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed because those trailers that I saw, I think they're pretty accurate to what the movie is. But at the same time, from what I gather about the Fast and the Furious movies, I think it's the same problem with this movie, to whereas the tone is a little off. It's just like the action, of course. The action is just as bonkers and ridiculous as what I've seen, you know, in clips from the Furious franchise. It's just totally ridiculous. Especially there's one of the last set pieces at the end of the movie in Samoa that involves a bunch of trucks and a helicopter, and it's just bonkers. It's ridiculously stupid. And, you know, the chemistry between The Rock and Jason Statham is really good, which is definitely what I was expecting from the movie. But at the same time, when they're joking around, there's certain things in the film that happens that they want you to really take to heart. And that's where it kind of loses me. You know, there's a love story in here between Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's character, which is Hobbs, and Shaw's sister, that just doesn't work. Because from the get-go, when the sister is mentioned to The Rock, they were already like hinting that they would get together, even though the two characters hadn't met yet. So it just came to a forced, and that's just one of my biggest pet peeves in movies, where it's romance or a love triangle is just shoehorned in just because there needs to be that kind of relationship, when this movie didn't need it at all. You could have just had Statham and The Rock and Vanessa Kirby just kick ass, and that would have been fine. But they just go that direction. I didn't really care for that, but the chemistry with The Rock and Statham is off the charts. The chemistry between The Rock and Vanessa Kirby was a little awkward. It just didn't work, and you could have cut out all that flirting and whatnot, and the movie would have benefited from it, for one sense, story-wise, and also because the runtime is like 2 hours and 15 minutes. If you cut all that out, that would have been like another 10 minutes off, and the movie does drag. There's some scenes that just go on for way too long. So I would have liked a shorter movie, because to be honest, I was bored at times. But as far as to go on with the chemistry as well with The Rock and Statham, I mean that was like the selling point for this movie, and I think it delivers for the most part. I mean, there's some riffing between the two, as far as like joke making, that doesn't work all of the time, but for the most part, it's good. It's really good. It keeps you engaged. Idris Elba is awesome. I love Idris Elba. That's probably another one of the biggest selling points for this movie for me. I've been standing Idris Elba for years. The Wire, Luther. He's been so good on and so many things, and obviously he's been brought up for James Bond, which I would love. I would love to see Idris Elba as James Bond. I don't think that's going to happen, but he was good. It's just that what this movie does is it's self-aware at times, and then other times it's not. The story, I mean, we've seen it a whole bunch of times before. You know, this evil guy comes in, he doesn't like humanity, he wants to destroy humanity. We've seen this so many times, and they handle it in such a way that they acknowledge how ridiculous it is, but at the same time, they take it just doesn't work. They take it seriously. That's where it kind of this movie lost me, is the tone. It's like either you go full action comedy or you take yourself really serious. And I feel like they just couldn't decide. And this was directed by David Leitch, who co-directed the first two John Wicks. He did Atomic Blonde, which I wasn't that big of a fan of, but he also did Deadpool 2, which I really, really like. I felt like he overall did a good job. With the action is good for the most part. I wish they didn't put as much slow-mo in as they did, but I don't know if that's like a thing in the Fast and the Furious movies, because like I said, I haven't seen any of the Fast and the Furious movies besides this one. So that might have been like out of his hands. That might have been a studio thing to make sure that it's connected in some ways to the bigger Fast and Furious universe. But, I mean, it's just like, it's what you expect, right? I mean, it's over-the-top action. The story is nothing special at all. But at the same time, it has its moments, for sure. Like, I didn't hate myself watching this movie. And there was also a couple cameos in here that I'm not going to spoil, but there's a couple cameos that kind of took me back. And it didn't distract me or anything, because I just engaged with it after that, but I think those cameos are just in there to make more movies. There's it's a couple characters who can easily pop up in the next Hobbs and Shaw, because I don't think they're going to be back in the actual main Fast and Furious franchise, so this might be like their new franchise that kind of links to the Fast and Furious. I'm not sure, but you can definitely see why those characters were put in, and the opportunities that the studio saw to get sequels out of these characters involved with the other two guys. So that was interesting. I didn't mind that. But overall, I mean, this is a fine movie. Did I walk out of this movie saying, you know what, I should watch the other Fast and Furious movies? Absolutely not. I don't see myself watching those movies anytime soon. It's not my cup of tea. This one, if it wasn't called Fast and Furious, or linked to the Fast and Furious at all, I think it would have been better, because then they wouldn't have been, because there's obvious like connections to Fast and Furious, although being someone who hasn't seen those movies, it wasn't so much that I didn't know what was going on. It's barely linked, but I feel like at the same time, there's the seriousness that goes with the Fast and Furious franchise, to where if this movie was just Hobbs and Shaw and those characters had never been Fast and Furious and it was his own thing, I think those handcuffs wouldn't have been on this movie, and they could have just had just a load of fun and not taken itself seriously at all. Now, granted, there's a lot of fun in this movie. The guys and everybody's having fun in this movie. Everybody knows what movie they're in. However, I just felt like they should have picked one side. And whether or not I would have liked a super serious Hobbs and Shaw better than what we got, or a super silly Hobbs and Shaw from what we got, that's not for me to say, because I don't know what that movie would have affected me, how it would have affected me. But it's good summer popcorn movie fare. I mean, I'm never gonna watch this movie again. It's a one and done for me. But I didn't hate myself watching it. It's fine. It definitely, But you know what? If you like the Fast and Furious movies, you're gonna like this movie. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't like this movie if you enjoy just ridiculous action. and silly comedy and all that. It's all in here. It just didn't land as a whole for me. It's still like, a 5.5 out of 10. It's a fine movie. So I would definitely recommend it if you like the Fast and Furious movies. If you don't, or you haven't seen any, I don't think you have to run out and see this one. I don't think that this is gonna get you hooked into the franchise. But it is what it is. We're in August now, so not the best quality of movies are coming out. August is known for like the dumping ground for studios because there's not a lot of competition. There's no real big ones coming out the rest of the month. Although next week there's a few big releases that we're going to have to decide on which one to review next week. But, I mean, when it's August and you want to escape the heat and, you see Hobbs and Shaw up on the marquee, go in. Go see it. If you want, just let alone for the air conditioning. You're going to get air conditioning out of the deal for the most part, I think, for most theaters. And I think that's worth it. But, it just didn't blow me away. I wish I enjoyed it more, but it's fine. So, I think that's going to be it for this week's episode. It's a very short episode. And, I don't know how this came out. I'm sure you guys will let me know. It felt a little awkward being by myself, talking for this long, but it is what it is. Mike will be back next week. We'll be discussing all the news and movies and reviewing the latest film. We got 3 big ones coming out next week. We have Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which, speaking of Guillermo del Toro, that's one that he produced. We also have The Kitchen, which is like a mob movie based on a DC comic. And of course, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, which everyone is clamoring for. Man, it would be something if I could drag Mike to see that one. I don't think it's going to happen, but that would be great. But yeah, guys, thanks for listening. Just to plug everything once again, we are on Twitter and Facebook. On Twitter, you can find us at PickPerfectCast. On Facebook and YouTube, please subscribe on YouTube. We are at Picture Perfect. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, at Picture Perfect. We would really appreciate it if you guys could give us 5 stars on Apple. That would really help out the podcast. But yeah, guys, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll talk to you next week.